The idea of a fictional character who's able to do things that non-fictional characters could never do has existed for about as long as fiction itself has. So basically, countless thousands of years of inspiration, innovation, and revolutionization has led to countless cool, fun, and interesting superpowers. So the idea of you making superpowers that stand out against probably billions or trillions of others throughout the millennia sounds like a bit of a challenge, to say the least. But I do believe that anyone who wants to be a writer has got what it takes to depict some really unique superpowers, despite how overwhelming doing so may seem at first. Whether it's a comic you want to make, or a TV show, or a book, or a movie, or a video game, or whatever, I believe the following tips are going to help tremendously in making some powers, and by extension, a story that stands out. Also, just for reference, consider basically any ability that you can't do in real life as a superpower, whether there's a different name in the story or not. In Avatar, bending is superpowers. In Dragon Ball, ki is superpowers. In mecha shows, if each character has a different ship or robot or whatever that has its own unique weapon or mechanic, consider it a superpower. Additionally, a lot of this video is going to be geared towards stories where there is a lot of action, because that's what tends to be the types of stories that have superpowers. But hey, if you're planning on writing some kind of drama or romance that just so happens to have people with powers, then you can still watch on along and take notes where you can. Step 1. Achieve perfection. This video was born out of this little three-way Venn diagram I created for myself to refer to when creating powers of my own for a little something not related to YouTube. Don't worry about it. As you can see, the three circles say unique, useful for a fight, and easy to explain. Through this diagram, I posit that the perfect superpower is a balance of all three of these elements. I also recognize what happens when you fulfill only two of the three qualities. A power that is unique and useful might be hard to explain. An easy to explain and unique ability might be hard to utilize. A useful and easy to explain power may have been done before already in another story. If you already have a set of powers you want to write with, try applying them to this Venn diagram, or maybe try to apply some of the most popular or your personal favorite superpowered characters to it. I was originally going to use this as a definitive way of determining a power for a character, but there's a fair bit of other things to consider. You might have noticed that not every character quite fits in that middle section. Even when you have some of the most iconic superpowered characters, they probably fit somewhere in the intersection surrounding the perfect zone. So, what does this mean? Are they all uncreative or poorly written powers? I believe that the short answer is no. A power that is only 2 out of 3 circles can still very well be enjoyable. On top of that, getting all 3 of the elements is not easy, nor does it instantly make it a stroke of genius. If you have a power that fits in the unoriginal section, you can add or change a mechanic or condition onto the basic ability. For example, if you want to have a character with fire powers, maybe make it so that he has to start a fire or even set himself on fire in order for it to work. Making an unoriginal power more interesting can be as simple as attaching them to an interesting character. You always see fire powers attached to people with matching fiery personalities. So why not give fire powers to a gentler soul who doesn't like hurting people? This will make for a very interesting character arc. Maybe this character will only use her powers for utility-based things, since fire has a lot more uses than just burning people. I believe these two things are enough to make something that's already been done feel fresh, and it's even better when you do them both in tandem. In the case of a hard-to-explain power, it's something that comes down almost entirely to your execution of it being demonstrated. It can be tiring to have to pause the story to explain a complex or convoluted power, so demonstrating it in these sorts of increments can be really effective. For example, having a character show up for short amounts of time and using an aspect of their power briefly before disappearing or whatever. Doing this 2 or 3 times before a more detailed demonstration will make things easier to follow for the audience once they see it in full. Another method that works really well is having the character learn about their ability with the audience, exploring every aspect of it little by little until they've mastered it. In the case of a hard-to-utilize power, both you and the character using it are going to have to think outside the box. You have at least 2 options here. Option A is to just not give them a combat-oriented role in the story. Maybe if they're part of a team, make them useful in another way, like the healer or tactician or the guy in the chair. Option B is to make them combat-oriented, but it's just going to take some more creative legwork, so to speak. If someone has a power that isn't useful for a fight, and they're going up against someone whose power is useful for a fight, how is the character going to make up for their inherent disadvantage? Are they somehow going to use their environment against their opponent? Are there going to be ways for them to outsmart their opponent? Or maybe they should have tools or weapons on them all the time that'll augment their supposed useless power and level the playing field. There is an option C, which is just to remove the character from the story when their power isn't useful, but this only really works when it's a minor character. Plus, I'm going to assume you'd like to create powers for characters who are gonna stay relevant. If you're doing a story with little to no action, replace fight with whatever they're gonna be doing, and apply the logic similarly. You can either give the character something to do that isn't as directly related to their power, and/or make them have to think outside the box and use methods other than just their power itself to make them do what they're intended to do. Finally, you don't have to pick just one option between A and B. Doing both will only make things more interesting. Before I made this video, I was simply going to start sharing this Venn diagram and propagate it as a singular useful tool for creating superpowers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it by itself is far from all you need to create good superpowers. I do think that it'll be good as a springboard for fleshing out your power and the character using it though. Getting a power that fits in the center can be great, and can also take a lot of effort, but making a power that's only 2 out of the 3 and making it work exceptionally can take just as much effort and is just as impressive. It might even be for the best to have a mix of characters with powers that fit in all the different parts of the diagram, because it'll make your story more diverse. Step 2. Defeat every character. One important thing to consider 99.9% of the time when creating superpowers is to ask yourself the question, how does one beat this? Keeping this question in mind is for the sake of keeping a character from getting overpowered. You need to have this question in mind for every character with a power you have, including protagonists, antagonists, and even those shifty side characters that constantly switch alignments. You obviously want to do this for your villains so that your hero can have a way to beat them. You also want to have at least a few ideas for how to beat the hero, even if you want to make them come through with a victory every time, so that you can at least have some tall obstacles for them to overcome. How the character would overcome these obstacles is going to be dependent on what the obstacle is, as well as what type of character is facing them. You also have to recognize that being possible to beat does not at all have to mean being easy to beat. If you want an overwhelming final boss or one of those cool, really strong mentor or sensei characters, the aim is to intentionally make them extremely tough to beat. But I think having a way to beat them sitting in your back pocket may help for later. Step 3. Consider the character. One important thing you never want to forget is what type of character you're attaching to the power. What's their personality like? How does it relate to their ability? It's a lot more fun to write a character who has a personality that somehow works in tandem with their power. For example, if you want a superhero with indestructibility, would it be more fun if they were super scared to go fight crime, or for them to be super cocky because they know that nothing can hurt them? Or maybe for them to be super protective of everything and everyone they care about, since no one else is indestructible like them? There's actually no right answer here, because it's whatever you think feels right. But it's always more entertaining when a character has something about them that plays into or relates to their ability. That's why, like I mentioned earlier, there are so many fire characters who are hot-headed, hard to predict and control, and sometimes prone to hurting the people around them. Personally, I sometimes like characters who have a personality that contrasts with their power, like Reed Richards, a serious, straight-laced genius scientist with the goofy power of stretching and morphing, which is usually reserved for comedic characters. Finally, you don't have to come up with the character first. Sometimes the power will come first, sometimes the character will. Be sure to also consider what the character is going to do in the story. A power that represents a character's arc is really entertaining and satisfying. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, Zuko's method of firebending changes over the course of the story along with his character. In a lot of battle and adventure shonen manga, the protagonist will gain strength or a new ability through things like failures, his willingness to protect what he loves, or something crucial that he learns about himself. People like to see people grow, so it only makes sense to show characters grow along with their power. Step 3. Steal from everyone else. So, here's a predicament that I bet many people might be in. You see a character, you love the character, you want a character like them to be in something you're gonna make. You are inspired by this character. There are a multitude of creative works in general that take inspiration from other creative works, but there is a certain point of debate when it comes to how much you're quote-unquote allowed to reference your source of inspiration. There's an argument that if you make the character too similar to their source of inspiration, then you are not actually being creative. I'm sure you've heard it before, but where actually is the line between inspiration and copying? Many people argue that when everyone makes any piece of creative work, they're copying at least one thing. It's just human nature to be influenced by all the different things you've seen and done in all aspects of your life. The more I think about it, it's probably true. If you've already created stuff, you can think of your most favorite work or your character or setting or whatever and take apart all the little aspects of it. And then you can ask yourself, where did this idea come from? And whether you knew it when you created the thing or not, it's possible, even probable, that whatever it is, it was taken straight from another creative work you enjoyed. Does that mean it's always okay to steal? No, not exactly. I think a fitting definition of inspiration would be stealing creatively. When taking inspiration from another work, it's important to figure out how you'd add your own flair. Like the generous kid says when he lets you copy his homework, be sure to change some stuff up. But unlike school, somebody will probably notice. But that's okay if you do it right. Changing just one thing about a character you took inspiration from can sometimes be enough to make them distinct enough to call it a proud, original creation that is entirely yours. Eventually, while fleshing out the character, more unique things about them will naturally fall into place. For example, let's take the Hulk, and let's change one thing about him. I think I'm going to go with the personality of the character. So Bruce Banner is an anxiety-ridden mess of a genius scientist, right? So what if we make this new guy an anarchist maniac who revels in the fact that there's a beast inside of him that no one can control, not even himself? Since this is a very different personality from Bruce, we're going to have to come up with a very different origin, and a very different character arc, and very different motives, and eventually we'll have spun a very different character from the Hulk, despite having taken inspiration from him. It's also important to combine the things that you take inspiration from, which means you've got to broaden your horizon and take inspiration from as many things as you can. This means to read comics and manga, watch cartoons and anime, play video games, watch TV and movies, read books, research mythology and folklore and history and foreign cultures. But also, this one may be tough to hear for some people, go outside. The best source for inspiration is real life, your life. When you are inspired by things that really happen to you, your story, your characters, your settings, your superpowers, everything will only feel more alive. I hope that this video helped to make your mark on the history of the trillions of stories out there in the world. Also, if you're working on something cool with superpowered characters, feel free to share it with me on Discord, either in my server or even in the DMs. I'm always excited to hear what other people are working on. Furthermore, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on this topic, so there may have been something that I either neglected or have even gotten wrong. If you've got 2 cents on the topic and there's some things you want to add or point out that might be wrong, you're very welcome to comment whatever you think will help other people figure out how to create their powers. This content is a bit different from the things I've made before, so if you guys found this interesting, be sure to let me know with those buttons and stuff everybody knows about. I also wanted to talk about power systems, like what you see in Battle Shonen series, but I think that I might need to study it a bit more or ponder on it a bit more, because I'm not too sure I get it to the point where I can explain it to other people. Other things I want to do videos on are how to hype up a character, how to write a good fight scene, and how to do power scaling right. If you want to see those things, subscribe, stay tuned, and join the Discord where I'll keep you guys posted, and have a nice day, I guess.